Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Getting Credit and Recognition for Method Development. I'm Lenny Tatelman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Protocols.io. And there are three of us who are scientists on the Protocols.io team, and we'll alternate who presents the webinars, the monthly webinars. So it's my pleasure to do it today. And as I just mentioned, we are recording this. We'll be sending the video and the slides to everyone who signed up. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. As I mentioned, we are recording. There will be a Q&A at the end. If there are any questions, there will be plenty of time for that. And as I said, this is a webinar that specifically focuses on getting credit for your method development and sharing your protocols publicly. We do have other regularly scheduled monthly webinars. So if this is your first time and you want a demo of the platform, introduction to Protocols.io, you should join one of the intro ones. If you want to see the more advanced features, there's a tools and tips for Protocols.io power users webinar. So take a look at the different webinars that we offer. You don't have to wait for the regularly scheduled. We also at this link, we also share some of the previously recorded ones. And if you have a specific question about any functionality on Protocols.io, at this link, you can book a one-on-one demo at a time that is convenient for you. We won't cover everything, and this is not going to be a live demo of the site. We're going to really focus on public sharing, the reasons for doing that, the venues, and different ways, not even exclusively on Protocols.io, although mostly, but not just about Protocols.io in terms of getting recognition for method development work. And on a personal note, this is the agenda. On a personal note, in terms of recognition, from the moment that we launched Protocols.io, giving people credit for the painstaking work of method development has always been really important for me, because my personal story, I'm a scientist, have a PhD in genetics in both computational and experimental wet lab biology. And it was my postdoc experience where I spent 1.5 years correcting just one step of the single cell microscopy protocol that I was using in my postdoc at MIT. And at the end of that 1.5 years, when I figured out that instead of a microliter of some chemical in a particular step, we needed 5, and instead of a 15-minute incubation digestion with an enzyme, we needed an hour. At the end of that 1.5 years comes the realization that this is not a new technique. It's correction of something that is previously published. So it's not a paper. I don't get any credit for it. And everyone else who's using this technique is getting completely misleading single cell microscopy results, or has to spend a year or two rediscovering that tweak, that correction. And so I became sort of obsessed with creating a central place to share this knowledge. So getting this information out and giving people recognition for their work is personally particularly important for me, and is very much part of our core mission. So before Protocols.io, I want to do a little bit of a historical note about protocol sharing, because in my view, there's sort of renaissance over the last 20 years, a flourishing of different venues and different ways to be recognized, not just with Protocols.io, not just through Protocols.io. And I think one of the key moments is early 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, when Nature Methods was launched. And this was a new journal in the Nature portfolio, and it's especially interesting to note if you talk to the founding editor of Nature Methods, Veronique Kiemer. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that. I meant to advance. So if you talk to Veronique Kiemer, it turns out that at the time when she was launching Nature Methods, even within Nature itself as a company, there was skepticism. People considered it dismissively, as she told us in an interview. And there was this sort of stereotype that all that researchers care about is publishing their results and new discoveries, and methods aren't important. But as most of us who actually do method development, and a lot of researchers do, inadvertently, sometimes with things that are supposed to take a couple of weeks, but take months or a year to get to work, there's a lot of work that goes into getting something to work, and especially in the case of nature methods, especially getting a new technique to work, and enabling others to answer questions with the new method. And so, of course, the skeptics were wrong, and Nature Methods has done remarkably well. Again, I click on the link instead of advancing. And since then, this was 2004, these are just different venues and journals and protocol sharing platforms that have gone live since 2004. And you can see that it's not just at Nature, even though Nature also launched Nature Protocols and Protocol Exchange in 2006. Cold Spring Harbor launched the protocol series. Cell Press has several offerings, Star Protocols and Cell Reports Methods. That is a newer journal. Elsevier has a journal dedicated to method sharing, Methods X. There is a biology-specific bioprotocol journal. Journal of Visual Experiments, I think, also launched in 2006 or somewhere around that time to make it easier to reproduce other people's protocols with videos as part of the peer-reviewed journal. And of course, Protocols.io launched in 2012. And so there's a real explosion in terms of places where you can get credit for that method development. So there are more and more journals, and we'll talk about a particular later on in this workshop. We'll talk about a particular partnership between Protocols.io and Public Library of Science that also tries to make it easier to get credit in a peer-reviewed mode for your work. But I just wanted to note that thanks to sort of the push from people that really care about methods, like Veronique Kiermer, there are many more venues that do not dismiss the work of method development and warmly accept for peer review method-focused submissions. So we're going to move back from peer-reviewed publishing in journals and talk about Protocols.io specifically, why we exist, and how it's slightly different from the journal offerings. And we launched in 2012. And in this cartoon, you can sort of see that modern papers are becoming more and more modular, with expectations that we're sharing code, data, and more reagents, and more expectations that methods accompany, detailed methods and protocols accompany, not just in a rough description of we approximately did this in the method section, but as separate modular standalone outputs. There's increasing expectation of that. And Protocols.io we launched, as I said, in 2012, and there are two sides to it. There is the private collaborative side that we charge for, and then the public side, if you're sharing methods publicly, it's unlimited and free to read and free to publish, open access. And that repository and that public sharing is what we're going to focus on in this webinar. Right? And so if you come to protocols.io, if you sign in, if you have an account, you will usually be inside the file manager looking at your own protocols. But I do want to remind, like I showed on the previous slide, that there are 15,000 public protocols. And before creating a new one that you want to share, first thing to do is take a look at whether anyone else has. And if you're looking for methods, this is a searchable repository. You can take a look at the 15,000 protocols on protocols.io. not all of them, but you can find the ones relevant for you. And if you don't know already, the functionality in Protocols.io is such that any method that you find, you can quickly use and reuse, adapt it for your own research. There is a copy fork button on it that allows you to clone the protocol, make it yours, and use it. So anything that you find in the public repository, it's easy for you to edit it, create a copy, edit it, and then if and when you're ready, share your tweaks and optimizations or different approaches in terms of the equipment that you use or the organism that you study. So it's not about a wrong or right protocol. It's about getting the space, the variability of approaches and the tweaks that we constantly make to protocols out into the public sphere. And here's the link to the welcome page from which you can easily search and access the many different public protocols. And one thing to note, you'll see that there's 154,000 registered users on protocols.io. That's people who have created an actual account on protocols.io to use it for organizing either in private mode or for sharing publicly their methods. But I do want to draw attention to the fact that most of the people that visit protocols.io, over 1 million people did so in 2022, most of the researchers are actually coming to look at these 15,000 public protocols. So when you share in protocols.io, it's not just for these 150,000 researchers that have created accounts, but because of the public repository side, there is a lot of visibility for your protocols if you're sharing them publicly. And I already mentioned that you can copy and fork and reuse any of the protocols that you find on protocols.io. And I won't have much time to talk about it, but when you do a search, I also wanted to mention that there are a lot of what we call public workspaces, communities that you can join and where protocols tend to be organized. So when you share public protocol, and we'll talk about discoverability and the reasons for sharing, if you're sharing publicly, you probably want people to find your work, and these public workspaces are relevant for that in the following sense. There are communities that you can join. A lot of them are open for everyone. Some are request to join or join by invitation, but there are many public workspaces focused on a particular technique or a model organism or a particular question like wastewater virus monitoring. And you can join one or more of these workspaces. You can, when you search on protocols.io, it's not only the protocols that you can search for in here, but you can also search these public workspaces. You can join them. And this way, if you're part of a community that uses methods similar to yours, or is looking at questions similar to what your research is focused on, when you join these, you can stay up to date. You can see discussions that are happening. You can ask questions to people that are working with similar techniques and are experts in them. And importantly, if and when you're ready to make your protocol public, if you belong to these public workspaces like this, by associating your protocol with one or more such communities, you quickly make it discoverable to the relevant audience. And some of the workspaces have hundreds of people in them. And so you're not just throwing it into a giant bucket with 15,000 protocols and waiting for someone to discover your protocol through Google or by a link from a research paper that you publish linking to the protocol. But by putting your protocols into such workspaces, you quickly increase visibility and discoverability of them for the relevant communities. So take a look. If you're not a member of any public workspaces, take a look to see if there are ones that relate to your research or your research methods. And if there aren't, you're welcome to click create new and nucleate and start such a community. And this is just a quick summary of the key functionality of protocols.io. They're not just static PDFs, but every protocol, as I said, is meant to be reused, to be updated over time. So there is easy versioning for wet lab and field biology protocols. There is a run button on protocols.io. So there's a lot of functionality. I did promise that we're not doing a live demo. This is not an intro to protocols.io, but I do want to mention that there are a lot of good features on the platform that facilitate collaboration, collaborative development, question and answer right on the protocols. And that's something for you to keep in mind. If you're looking at somebody's protocol, any step you can click on and you can ask a question that will go to the authors and people that are using that technique. So a lot of great functionality and good reasons for using protocols.io. But as I said, on this webinar, we really want to focus on what are the benefits of sharing your protocol specifically publicly on protocols.io. And the first one that I'm underscoring is that your protocol becomes, once you publish it on protocols.io, which is easy to do, it gets indexed in Google, in Google Scholar. I think 60% of the traffic to that 2 million plus visits per year to the public protocols, 60% of that traffic comes from Google, and Google Scholar recently started indexing protocols.io. So people can find your work, and you will see on every public protocol, there is a metrics tab where we try to share everything that we know about the protocol. So for your own protocols, you'll know exactly how people are using and reusing, engaging with it. If you're searching and looking at other people's protocols, this metrics tab gives you a hint of which ones seem to be tested by time and other researchers. And if you have 10 different search results for a particular common technique, looking at the metrics tab is a way to see which one is more likely to work and which one you might be able to trust and dig into in the beginning. So we try to be very transparent and try to share as much of the information as we have around every protocol. And when it comes to reproducibility, if you start using protocols.io, especially if your university has a site license and it's free for you and unlimited, as is the case with many research universities. And I'm assuming that everyone on this webinar is academic. We have separate biotech and pharma webinars. So if you're thinking about public sharing, I'm assuming that you're in academia. So I'm talking about universities. But if you're using protocols.io early on, sorry about that. If you're using it early on in your research, then protocols.io makes it easy when you're publishing papers, research papers. It makes it easy to share your protocols and improve the reproducibility of the papers that you publish while guiding more people to the methods. And there is a lot of evidence. Here's a study from Center for Open Science and Science Exchange around reproducibility of published papers. And from 53 papers, this is summary on Center for Open Science of an initiative called Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project, where the team tried to look at 50 or 53 cancer papers in high impact journals. And what they found is that 0% of the method sections of those papers adequately described the details of the procedures that you need to repeat the work. And since then, there's been a significant push from journals to encourage much more detailed sharing of protocols when you submit a paper. And protocols.io makes it really easy. If you're using it and already have your protocols and protocols.io, it's just a few clicks to get a DOI, make your protocol citable, and include it in the paper that you're about to publish. And unlike having your protocols float around in Google Docs or on Twitter, sharing your knowledge, not Twitter anymore, sorry, as of today, it's X, but when you share in a repository, because we do at protocols.io, like many other repositories, we make sure that there is long-term digital preservation. We mirror your content in multiple places. We archive it with the Internet Archive, with a nonprofit repository called Clocks, and other places as well. So when you share in protocols.io, you know that the protocol won't suddenly disappear or go behind someone's subscription account all of a sudden, or someone deletes their email address and the Google Doc is no longer available. So you really ensure long-term access, just as the act of publishing a paper ensures long-term access to the content. These are the things that we do on protocols.io to make sure that it doesn't disappear. And on the collaboration side, when you share protocols, there is an interesting quote we have from a professor at the University of Adelaide who said, 80% of my recent collaborations have been a direct result of sharing our protocols publicly on protocols.io. And he's been doing it in one of those, there's a link to his profile here, and you can see the workspaces he belongs to. He actually created, along with another colleague, they created a public workspace, a community for sharing single cell methods that they curate and develop. And I do recognize that whether you're sharing code or writing a paper or sharing a protocol, the act of sharing takes time. The act of sharing a good protocol takes your attention and energy. But there are benefits not just to the public and not just for the sake of reproducibility, but there are direct benefits to the researcher who is sharing the work. And a lot of the scientists that come to protocols.io, the feeling that they have is, as you see in the example here, sharing protocols leads to collaboration. It brings you questions, it brings you recognition from the field. And if you're sharing detailed protocols as part of your research papers, there is a sense, anecdotally at least, we haven't done analysis, but there is a sense from scientists that sharing the detailed protocols makes it more likely that people will trust your paper, that they will build on it, that they will follow up on it, and that they will cite it. So there are professional benefits like this to sharing your protocols, even if they're not peer reviewed, just with a simple few clicks to publish your protocol. And I really like this tweet from last year, from 2022, where a professor said, what if labs publish each of their unique methods protocols in bioRxiv and in future papers instead of rewriting the protocols, and we just cite them? We waste so much time on methods by saying the same thing differently, just so it's not a plagiarism. And several people replied to this thread saying that's exactly what protocols.io exists for. And in fact, we're huge fans of bioRxiv. If you're in the biology field, we're huge fans of bioRxiv. We know the people that run that preprint service. And if you submit protocols to them, they will often steer you to protocols.io because they don't actually take protocol preprints. So we're sort of like bioarch in the biology world, we're sort of like a bioRxiv for methods protocols specifically. But this, this point is a very salient one that we as a community spend a lot of time, reinventing the wheel and rephrasing things instead of just sharing a link. And then if it's your own work and you're using the same technique in a different paper a year later, by sharing already on protocols.io, it makes it really easy to write the method section to just put in the link to that same protocol or a slight variant of it if you use the forking feature without agonizing how to rephrase the method and avoid plagiarism detection software. And methods should not count as plagiarism, of course. But Protocols.io does make it very easy to drop your protocols into a paper. We also have something that is called a collection. So it's not just individual protocols that get a DOI and become citable, but you can easily create a sort of container on protocols.io with 10 or however many relevant protocols accompany your paper, get a DOI for your collection, put the protocols in it. And as an example of this PLOS Bio paper, you can see the method section at the very top says that the details for the media and recipes relevant to this paper are available as a collection on protocols.io, and it's a single link that takes the reader to all of the detailed, I believe it's 10 different protocols that accompany this paper. So hopefully by using protocols, it makes it easier to write your method sections and eventually actually saves you time rather than just being additional work in your publishing flow. And as I said, with my personal story, it's really important for us that you have an easy place to share corrections and optimizations as needed after you've published on protocols.io. So at any point, you can come back to your protocol, share an improvement, clarify the language, make a step easier, add a video or an image, or correct something. And the previous version doesn't disappear, but we guide everyone to the newest version that you've shared. And there's even a compare button that allows you to see what's in version 2 versus version 3 and what has changed. So it's easy to navigate, easy to cite, and from the protocol itself, it's easy to add the link right back to the paper. So you can see on PLOS Biology, it links to protocols.io, and on the protocols.io side, if you were to mouse over PLOS Biology here, it would pop up the reference, or if you click on metadata, you'd see the citation of the paper. And if you click on it, it will take you right back to the paper. So there's a bidirectional link. And as I mentioned, more and more journals are aware of the challenges of reproducibility. And at this point, there is not just 500, but I think over 600 journals that have protocols.io explicitly in author guidelines. There are more and more funders that recommend or require sharing your method knowledge on protocol repositories and sometimes protocols.io specifically. So it helps with compliance, it helps with improving reproducibility, and with submitting more rigorous papers that are easier for others to build upon. The compliance I already mentioned, there are a lot of, on the US side, we know of laboratories, research teams that add protocols.io sharing plans into their NSF, NIH grants, and across the world in Europe, in Australia, we know that people are more and more frequently putting the protocol sharing, just like data sharing plans, into their grant applications. I'm going to skip, this is the publishing flow. You can see, I'm not going to spend much time on it, skip over it, but once you click publish, really you have to check that you have the abstract title, that there's content in your protocol. You add authors, funder acknowledgement, affiliation of the authors, any additional comments, link it to the workspaces that are relevant that you're part of. preview, and then you confirm that your co-authors are happy with you to push it live, and that's it. So if you have a protocol that is ready, it's literally a couple of minutes to push it live and get a DOI and make it easy to cite. It is not at all an onerous process. I do want to note that if you don't want to make your protocol fully public and you're submitting a paper and you'd rather have it go through peer review and get accepted first, you do have the option, instead of clicking fully publish, you do have the option of clicking reserve DOI, where you'd go through this flow, but then you are sharing a private link. The DOI is reserved. You can put it into the paper. There's a private link to share with editors and reviewers. You can put it into the manuscript. But until the paper is accepted, until you explicitly decide to make it fully public, it's a reserved DOI, and the method stays public, and it's through the private link that editors and reviewers can access it, or your collaborators, but it doesn't show up in our search results. It won't show up on Google or Google Scholar. So you have these options if you are thinking of sharing publicly on protocols.io. You don't have to do it right away. You can do the reserve DOI. And we are sort of coming to the Q&A very shortly. We're more than halfway through the webinar, but as I said in the beginning, I do want to highlight a more recent partnership that we have with the journal PLOS ONE, where they've created an article type that's not a research article, but it's called Lab Protocol article type. And that is a channel specifically designed for publishing peer-reviewed protocols. And so on protocols.io, you'll see a peer review button that leads you to submission in PLOS ONE. And so this is a way of taking a protocol that you have in protocols.io, and if there's been significant effort that you've put into it and you've modified, it's not just a mini tweak of a buffer, but it's something that you've put months of work into, and you feel like sharing it as a peer-reviewed protocol would be a service to the community. PLOS ONE very much welcomes these papers. It's not about new data. It's not about a new research, groundbreaking research result. It really is about showing that you have a protocol that you've tested, that you know is robust, and it is then welcome in PLOS ONE even before you've used it to generate data. And there is a link, as I said, we'll share the slides. There is a link to the types of papers that you see shared in PLOS ONE with this, but in terms of the theme of this virtual webinar means virtual, that's redundant. In terms of the theme of the webinar being credit and recognition, not only can you just quickly make something public on protocols.io, but we do encourage, through PLOS ONE integration, we encourage getting peer review for your protocol and turning it into a formal paper, if that's helpful and if you think community would benefit from it. And of course, if you think back to the slide that I call the Renaissance of protocol sharing, you're not limited to PLOS ONE, and your fields, the journals. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, there are other method-focused journals that we frequently see people sharing their protocols in with peer review. And before we go to the Q&A, as a last note, I wanted to come back to that idea of sharing protocols when you are publishing research articles. And of course, the most important thing is that you share the protocol instead of just saying, we use the slightly modified procedure as reported in this other paper, and then it's a wild goose chase to find out the exact details. So the most important thing is that you share, whether it's on protocols.io or somewhere else, or as a supplementary file, that's less important than the act of sharing the detailed protocol itself. That said, here's a link to a really nice article about a push away from supplementary files. There are many reasons. I'm not going to go through this entire article, but there are many reasons why it's better to share in repositories than as supplementary files, such as, if you share on protocols.io instead of a PDF, you can version it, you can improve it, you can answer questions, like we said, the dynamic and interactive part. People can easily take your protocol and clone it and then use it instantly as a template for their own work, which is much harder to do with PDFs. But I think one of the most beautiful examples of why why it's better not to share through supplementary PDF files, and this is, I think, my all-time favorite example of the power of sharing in a place like protocols.io. Here's an example of a scientist asking if someone can recommend a method for RNA extraction from primary cortical neuron cultures. And a postdoc from UCSF said, University of California, San Francisco, she said, out of the few that I see on protocols.io, here's the one that I recommend specifically for this that should work for you. And what I absolutely love about this example is that if you actually look at the protocol itself, it turns out to be a protocol that accompanies a paper in the journal GigaScience on parasites of three-spine stickleback fish. And not only did it's actually a paper from authors in Australia, and not only did the authors make the paper itself more reproducible by sharing the detailed protocols alongside the paper, but by putting it in protocols.io in a repository, they make it discoverable and reusable for people that are completely outside of the field, right? The parasite of three-spine stickleback has nothing to do with cortical neuron cultures, but of course, methods are very similar, right, in terms of getting RNA or DNA or protein out. And this kind of example happens over and over, and the chance of this researcher reading this paper and finding this protocol, if the protocol was a supplementary PDF, the chance of that is close to zero. But because the protocol is in a repository, it's easy to discover, it's easy to build upon and reuse sort of this off-the-shelf use. And this is just a beautiful example of what is enabled by sharing protocols in repositories, for the same reason that we share DNA sequences, protein structures, and other things in discipline-specific relevant repositories. And these are just examples of people sharing protocols as part of their publications and citing protocols and reusing them and citing them in their papers. And with that, as promised, I will stop and see if there are any questions. And we'll stop recording here and open it up to questions.